Okay, this is a book review. The name of the book is Born Fighting by Jim Webb. And I kind of read this book on a bit of a whim. I had previously read How the Scots Invented the Modern World by Arthur Herman. And I like Arthur Herman. He's the guy who wrote The Light in the Cave, which is a great book. And, you know, there's some pretty smart Scottish people. I think a lot of times people that live north are become a little smarter because they got a cold winter. They got to be resourceful to survive the winter. But, you know, the Scots, I didn't think had done that much compared to the English or even the Irish in literature. Walter Scott, Ivanhoe, was a good writer, but a little boring and predictable, I thought. I liked Bobby Burns, the poet. Okay, I liked Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. I thought that was really good stuff. But anyways, I was a little bit, Adam Smith, capitalism. That's all well and good, but, Buswell and the biographer of Samuel Johnson, that's nice, but, I still wasn't that excited for it. And then I saw this book, and I go, well, I'll just check it out. So anyways, here's another title of the book. And I'm going to tell you, this book turned out to be extraordinary. It actually affected my thinking in a big way. How the Scots Irish shaped America. So he talks about the history of the Scots Irish, but I didn't realize there's so many famous Scots Irish people, including General Patton in World War II, Ronald Reagan, the great president, and many of the most prominent people in country music and in the military. They're rather extraordinary. And this guy, I think sort of typifies the typical tough Scottish guy. Because I know the Scots were pretty smart, pretty tough. They're like Ireland. My father's from Ireland. And the Scottish were always being hassled by the English, England. And they were also, they had to fight back. They're right in contact with England, so England is constantly on their ass, trying to steal their land, treating them very terrible. And it's rough country. They live in these mountain highland-like areas, many of them. So they're really tough guys. And if I had to summarize the personality of the Scots after having now studied them for quite a while, or quite a bit through this book and related things that I read related to this book, their attitude's kind of like, leave us alone. And then England comes in and says, no, I'm going to make you do this. And they're like, leave us alone. And then England's like, you do as I say or I will kill you. And the Scottish attitude is kind of, well, then go ahead and try to kill me, asshole. That's their attitude. They're very ornery and tough and fight. And this guy's a perfect example. He's the author of the book. His name's James Webb or Jim Webb. He was a Vietnam soldier. He won multiple medals for bravery, multiple medals also for being wounded. He was a platoon commander, marksmanship. He later became Secretary of the Navy for the USA. He's wearing a Scottish tie. By the way, I bought a Scottish tie. I like this book so much, I bought a Scottish tie in honor of it. I was really impressed because I learned a lot of things I hadn't previously understood about the Scots. And I had a little bit of resentment, just to be honest with you. The English had moved them into Northern Ireland to take over Northern Ireland, the Ulster region, so to speak. And a lot of them weren't that nice to the Irish, but I didn't fully understand it. England wasn't that nice to them either. When the people from England went to USA, you think of them as the New Englanders, the wealthy people, all these educated founding fathers that have read all these books, they're literary and scholars and stuff. When you think of the Scots Irish, they're poor. They went to Appalachia, the Appalachian Mountains. They're poor, and they're stereotyped by the USA. The public schools hate them, and they call them white trash and things like that. But you start reading about them, you're like, holy crap, these people are impressive. Okay, so anyways, here's Jim Webb when he himself was in Vietnam. Later on, here he is as a Secretary of the Navy. He was involved in a lot of big stuff, and he had other really high positions in government. He was a senator. Okay, so I just want to show you real quick a map. I think this video is going to be worth your while. It's an extraordinary history that's hard to put all together. I put it all together for this talk because I found it so interesting. So, here of course is Ireland. Here's Northern Ireland. Here is England. Here's Wales. Here is Scotland. It's just north of England. They got to live in cold weather. This line right here is Hadrian's Wall, where the Romans built a wall to wall off the Scots, because the Scots were pretty vicious fighters back in the good old days. Okay, they were the Celts, and they also had the people called the Picts who would paint their faces, and they were tough fighters. They would fight to the death. Okay, and Rome briefly got all the way a little farther up to the Firth of Forth and built Antonine Wall, but they fought them back and knocked them back to Hadrian's Wall, and that's where the truth stood for a long time. Okay, so the Romans could never conquer the Scottish people. They conquered England, but they could not conquer the Scottish people. Okay, and that tells you a lot about them, because Romans conquered just about anybody they went next to. Okay, but they couldn't conquer the Scots. The Scots were great fighters. And there's a lot of highlands and mountain lands. It's very beautiful. Look how beautiful this is. This is typical Scotland, okay, Loch Lomond. And there's a magnificent song about this, but this is the kind of picture you should have in your mind of Scotland. I'll show you another picture kind of like that too. Here's another Loch Lomond, the old castle. Okay, and remember the movie Braveheart. Braveheart's one of the greatest movies of all time. And that really tells the story like it was. The English were just brutalizing them, and they fought back. And there were other battles that fought. This one came a little later, Bonnie Prince Charles, okay? And, you know, it gets a little complicated, but that's a big story, and it's related to Loch Lomond, okay? Do I fight to the end, or is it time to retreat? Anyways, it's big stuff, the attempt at Catholic renewal in Scotland. Now here is, and, you know, getting freedom from England. I think this is the best version of Loch Lomond. You'll take the highway, I'll take the low way, together we'll meet. All right, so it's a magnificent song. I'll actually try to remember. I'll put it in the links below, and I got a couple other songs. I'm trying to get you in the mood for this. This is a big event, okay? This is Scotland. I finally understood the place. I finally understood the people. Because I've known a lot about them, and I've known a lot of them, but this was something else. Scotland the Brave. This is in their blood. Like I said, they're some of the most fiercest, tough people you'll ever see. And I think Ireland, you know, Irish Catholics, I think we're more fun. I think we're more literary than they are. I think we're funnier than they are. But man, are they smart and tough. I think they're smarter and tougher than the Irish. And I don't say that willingly or easily. I say that reluctantly after having been so impressed by studying them. So Scotland the Brave, magnificent on the bagpipes. Okay, here's Amazing Grace. The bagpipes, Scottish Dragoons are magnificent, okay? I'll try to link to all this stuff, their songs. And here's the movie Braveheart with Mel Gibson, and it's a true story. That's what happened, okay? William Wallace was a great man, and he did the best he could to help the Scottish get some independence from England. And later on, Robert the Bruce was a bit of a weasel early on. He later came back and was a great man, and he was victorious at Bannockburn, the Battle of Bannockburn, which was a big victory for the Scottish over the British and English, and that helped them to get some measure of independence for a while. Okay, but yeah, if you haven't seen this movie yet, it's one of the greatest movies of all time, Braveheart. That's real life, okay? That's real life for the Scots, and that's what it was like for the Irish. Sort of the weakness of the Celts, the Celtic people like Scotland and the Celtic people like Ireland, and I love this Celtic tie, was that they tended to be loyal to a tribal leader, to an individual who they knew, as sort of a bottom-up organization of their military, which made them very effective for their number. But what would happen is when they would come across England, where the people were loyal from the king down, they had this national army. It was just too many people. It was too overwhelming. So even though they were man for man much better than the English, let's say 2 or 3 times as good, they could be outnumbered 5-1, and they just didn't have much of a chance, okay? And that's a lot of times how all these countries were destroyed. In Ireland, they had all these chieftains in separate spots, but they couldn't coherently, consistently unify, and so they got their butt kicked by England, for example. And something similar happened in ancient Greece. You know, all the ancient Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta and the other Greek city-states, you know, they were able to unify to fight the Persians, and they defeated the Persians, you know, early on, like the Herodotus wrote about that, you know, near around 500 AD. However, they could not later unify as effectively, and Macedonia came in there and kicked their butt, you know. King Philip of Macedon and later his son Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great loved the Greeks, but still, he was in charge of them in a sense, okay? So people unable to unify end up getting their butts kicked in the real world. That's just how it goes. All right, now here's something interesting from the Revolutionary War in 1780. This is the Battle of King's Mountain. So the English there, the Redcoats were there, and they were sort of hassling the mountain men of the United States, which is a lot of these Scots Irish guys. And they expect the Scots Irish to back down, but the Scots Irish people said basically, F you, England, and they fought them in the mountains, and they kicked the crap out of the English. The English couldn't believe it, okay? So it's a very famous battle, the Battle of King's Mountain in South Carolina, 1780. All right, and the Scots Irish mountain men kicked the crap out of the British, and it was a big surprise victory. So, and then I remember learning about all these guys when I was growing up, just vaguely. I didn't have a deep understanding of them, but I remember hearing about Lewis and Clark with Thomas and Jefferson exploring the West. You know, all these guys with their buckskin coats. You know, they kind of look like Indian gear, and you know, how heroic and brave they were. And I heard all these guys. I just thought they're early Americans, frontiersmen. I didn't realize most of these guys are Scots Irish, okay? Lewis and Clark, Scots Irish guys, all right? And most of these other guys that I remember learning about when I was a kid, they're Scots Irish guys. Here's another painting of Lewis and Clark sort of exploring out west. Okay, here's like the biggest badass president we ever had was Andrew Jackson. And Jim Webb, he's a Scots Irish guy. Jim Webb says he is the most underrated president in United States history. When you first hear about him, he's kind of a scary badass. He was orphaned. He was a tough guy. He had to fight his way out of so many problems. And that's what this is about, the title of this book, Born Fighting. Yeah, the Scots would love to sit around reading a book, but they're not allowed to. And it's been kind of sad. They've been hassled the crap out of them, when they were getting hassled by England. And they come to the United States, and they're still getting hassled. All right, so the Scots Irish, they are very much of a get out of my face. Okay, they're very aggressive and tough. But you understand why. You respect them, okay? And he was a military hero. He was a legal hero. He was a presidential hero. This is one of the all-time great presidents, Andrew Jackson. And I say that based on understanding what he did, okay? Nowadays, they try to make you like some girly man scumbag who betrays the country, and they try to badmouth the guys who were the real patriots that try to help the country. Andrew Jackson did the best he could for the people of America. He was a populist president, and that's another reason why he's hated, because he supported the common man rather than just his group of cronies, so to speak here. Okay, here's Daniel Boone by Chester Harding, this painting. Here's Daniel Boone, a movie they made about him. Another heroic frontiersman. Sam Houston, another heroic frontiersman. And there's a bunch of other ones. Davy Crockett, I'll show you a painting of him too. And so what I'm trying to say is, most of these heroic frontiersmen, when you look a little closer, they're Scots Irish guys, okay? And that's what I meant by they're tougher and they're more aggressive and they're better fighters than the Catholic Irish, okay? Catholic Irish did a lot of great things too, okay? I love Dagger John, the bishop in New York who built the cathedral and all that kind of stuff. There's lots of great things the Catholic Irish did too, okay? But the Scots Irish, man, they're tough, ornery son of a guns. Okay, here is Kit Carson, Wyatt Earp's another Scot Irish guy. Tons of these old-time American frontier heroes. They're Scots Irish, okay? And of military heroes, a lot of the biggest and the bestest. And I'm only mentioning a couple of them. There's way more than what I'm showing here. I don't have time to go through all of them. Here's Ulysses S. Grant, the leader of the North in the Civil War. Here's McClellan, another one of the generals of the Civil War. Okay, and there's controversy about him, but we're not going to go into all that today. Stonewall Jackson, okay, one of the best generals for the South in the Civil War. Jeb Stuart, another one of the great generals of the South in the Civil War. Okay, they did have a couple good writers. I forgot to mention Edgar Allan Poe was a Scots-Irish guy, and he was brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant poet and writer. Okay, now here's a guy who was a good guy, this guy, William Jennings Bryan. And he was, a politician guy largely, but the reason why I think he's interesting too is he was trying to defend Christianity at the Scopes monkey trial was called, about the teaching of evolution in the schools. And he ran into the atheist Clarence Darrow, who was a real smart lawyer. And basically Clarence Darrow kind of kicked his butt in the legal debate, which is unfortunate because I can tell you, the whole idea of atheism is to try to trick the public into thinking you come from chimps. Our chromosomes are totally different than the chimpanzees, okay? They'll talk about a tiny part of coding DNA and say, oh, it's so much like a chimp. BS, okay? We have totally different chromosomes. Our regulatory DNA is totally different than them. So, there's going to be overlap in DNA sequence because all life forms on Earth run glycolysis, for example. All right, well, anyways, this became a very famous thing and helped push evolution to be taught more in the schools and taught eventually exclusively with no teaching of intelligent design and creationism. Okay, I'm an A+ student at Stanford in evolutionary biology, and I believe that all this life on Earth was created by God. Evolution can't explain it. It can only explain microevolution. It can't explain macroevolution. People who tell you otherwise, they don't know it. Look up James Tour if you want to see a contemporary guy, and Stephen Meyer if you want to see contemporary people that know a lot about evolutionary biology. Douglas Axe, there's a whole bunch of other ones. It's God's creation, okay? When you really know biology, biochemistry, molecular biology, and I have a very high level of knowledge of that stuff, I can tell you, it's God. It's so far beyond anything that could happen by accident or mankind. It's not even funny. So anyways, this is the famous Scopes trial, Scopes monkey trial, William Jennings Bryan. He also had the famous speech, don't crucify us on a cross of gold. That's another big speech of his. All right, here's Robert McCormick, Colonel Robert McCormick. He's another guy who's a bit of a badass, Scots-Irish guy, World War I hero. He was pretty rich. He ended up owning the Chicago Tribune newspaper, and then he donated money to build a place called McCormick Place, pretty famous place in Chicago. And he donated money to build a military park called Cantigny, which is a beautiful place for family picnics, and it's one of those places where they got all these old World War I, World War II tanks, and the kids can climb on them, so it's a nice place to go for a picnic, nice gardens, kind of like an arboretum, like the Morton Arboretum, plus they got military museums that you walk through, and they're quite impressive and interesting, so it was nice of him to donate that money. Never had any kids, so if you don't have any kids, you end up having more money, you can do things like that. All right, now here's Alvin York, and this is a typical Scots Irish guy. He's like the greatest military hero of World War I for the USA. Okay, this guy, like almost by himself, captured, it's almost like something out of a comic book. He captured so many German soldiers and equipment from Germans. It's almost unbelievable what he did. But the Scots Irish were great soldiers. They're like the best United States soldiers. And again, I say that reluctantly because it's just true. The more you read about it, you'll see one Scots Irish hero, then another, and they weren't just brave. They were freaking smart and incredibly skilled. Okay, what he did was, it's extraordinary. Okay, you read about these other guys, you'll be so amazed by them. They're so clever and resourceful and so talented, it's not even funny. So this Alvin York, okay, the greatest USA soldier in World War I. And guess what? They had the greatest USA soldiers in World War II also. Here is a painting of Sergeant York. Okay, and these guys all around him, he captured so many of them. It's literally kind of amazing. Okay, they're like the main pioneers of country music. Don't get me wrong, the Irish Catholics also help with country music, but Scots Irish really pushed country music, and that tells you something about America. When you think of American music, the most American of music is country music. Okay, and that comes from the Scots Irish. So the Scots Irish, even though they get spit upon and criticized, they actually are sort of like the backbone of the United States. Okay, they're tough, proud, individualistic, nonconformist, fighting people, and that's kind of like a big part of what made America great. Okay, Jimmie Rodgers is a great singer. He's sort of considered by many the father of country music. Okay, and then right after Jimmie Rodgers is Hank Williams Sr. Okay, Hank Williams Sr., he's got lots of songs. I Saw the Light, okay? And that's what I love, too, about country music. It kind of comes mostly out of the church, Christian music, so it's really Christian music, most of it, but it's also comes out of the bars, out of the saloons, you know? This is a great album, Hank Williams, Pictures from Life's Other Side, and he's got all these great songs. I love them, you know? And a lot of them, they're about Christianity, about his appreciation for God. I Heard My Mother Pray Again. They're great. I own these albums. I love them, okay? I started listening to country music when I was in college because I hung around then with a bunch of guys all these wrestlers that loved country music, and I just started listening to it because they did. I didn't even know country music until then. I used to hear bad things about it. Okay, George Patton, greatest USA general ever. He's another Scots Irish badass guy. Okay, they have a very, very, very strong and proud military tradition. And here, here's Patton as a young guy, total badass guy in front of the World War I tank. Okay. Here's General Patton in World War II in Italy near Sicily. And I read biographies about him. I read histories about him. He's an incredibly impressive guy. Okay. And here's another military genius, Scots Irish guy, Douglas MacArthur. Okay, those are the two best generals the USA had in World War I. In World War II. MacArthur and MacArthur said a lot of great things. He said, the main cause of war is undefended wealth. Okay, and so that's sort of what happens when, there's been all this push the last 40 years to feminize the USA, feminize the USA, feminize the USA. So you take this big wealthy country, and if you feminize all the men, then the place is undefended, okay? And that's kind of what's happened to the USA. It's just put itself up for the pickings to be ripped off. Because when I was a kid growing up, we watched movies like Patton on TV. We watched all this Davy Crockett stuff, and these were guys who were heroes to us, Douglas MacArthur. So it was macho and proud and strong when I was young, but I've seen how USA now is sort of feminized and confused, and the public schools have made all these kids total ignoramuses. They don't know their culture. They don't know their history. That's partly why I'm making this video for young people. They can get educated for free. Just watch my videos, and you'll know the truth about American history. The truth about Christianity. Okay, now here's another perfect example. The most decorated soldier of all World War II is this guy, Audie Murphy. Okay, and that's typical. That's not a coincidence that the most decorated USA soldier for World War I was Alvin York, a Scots Irish guy, and the most decorated guy in World War II was Audie Murphy, a Scots Irish guy. That's the standard pattern. That's how it goes. And according to Jim Webb, he says, of all the institutions in the United States, the most characteristically Scots Irish was the military. At least he said the good part of it, you know. And for example, he was a platoon leader, officer in Vietnam in the United States Marines. And when people think about the greatness of the United States Marines, what do? They think about the Scots Irish. Chesty Puller, Raymond Davis, okay? Those are the guys, big-time superstars in the USA Marines. You know, smart, honest, fair, skillful guys, okay? Heroic. That's what America needs, guys like this. Okay, here's Raymond Davis, another Medal of Honor winner, okay? Korean War. And then here's Chesty Puller, the great Chesty Puller. You know, one of the famous United States generals of all time, military guys of all time. Just a tough Scots-Irish guy. I read biographies of him when I was younger, and I was real impressed how heroic he was, okay? Okay, and then now a little bit about some other people of Scots-Irish descent. You know, like here's Judy Garland, the great singer from the Wizard of Oz movie. The author of the Wizard of Oz is another Scots-Irish guy. Jimmy Stewart, the great actor, Scots-Irish guy, and this is a magnificent movie. It's one of the greatest movies of all time, It's a Wonderful Life. So is The Wizard of Oz. They're magnificent. These are beyond good. These are sublime. These are masterpieces that people will watch for all time as the top-notch top-notch artistic creations in theater and movie. Okay, this is one of the all-time greatest movies of all time. I love this movie. This is what love and family should really be all about. That's what I wanted. My wife didn't want that, but that's what I wanted. That's what my childhood was like. It's beautiful. Okay, now here's another great Scots-Irish guy, Johnny Cash. Okay, I think June Carter is Scots-Irish too, in the Carter family of country music singers, but I'm not positive about that. And what does Johnny Cash say? He says, Jesus Christ is my Savior, and I don't care if you don't like it, that's a fact, okay? It's not a coincidence that the best music always comes from Christians, 99% of the time, okay? And I would say the Catholic Irish are better musicians than the Scots Irish. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great Scots Irish country music singers, Johnny Cash, probably June Carter, Jimmy Rogers, Hank Williams Jr., Hank Williams Sr., Dolly Parton, and a whole bunch of other ones. So I guess they're probably as good as the Irish, but the Irish Catholics are magnificent. I love them. The Wolfe Tones, the Dubliners, the Chieftains. I love all that Irish stuff. John McCormick. It's just in their blood, the Irish, to be great musicians. Okay, here's Ronald Reagan with Nancy, and he's one of the greatest United States presidents of all time. Okay, I was around when he was president, and I can tell you, California was so rich, it was richer than most countries, that college was free. You could go to college for free. The state was so rich. Nowadays, the Democrats have turned California into a third world crap hole. And then they want more power and more responsibility so they can destroy more things. No, you need a guy like this. Get a Scots-Irish guy in there, and he'll make things rich and profitable by creating win-win deals for everybody. Instead of, pretending he's going to save the environment by taking everybody's stuff away. Give me a break. Okay, here's a good quote of Ronald Reagan. Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in the United States when men were free. Yeah, that's kind of like what I am. Okay? I know how free America was when I was a kid. It's not the same now as it was then. You could talk openly. You could have an opinion. You wouldn't be hassled. Okay? Nowadays you're hassled. You got all this political correctness just means promote communism. It's bullshit, okay? You're not allowed to have an opinion. And they hate all the... I realize who the Democrats hate the most. They hate these guys. They hate the Scots Irish. And that's sort of like, once they got rid of JFK, that was sort of the takeover of the Democratic Party by the communists. And then they wanted to solidify their takeover by pushing out all these Scots-Irish guys. So like Jim Webb, when he was young, his family were Democrats, but they've been pushed into the Republican Party. So that's what they used to call them, the Democrat Republicans, okay? The Reagan Democrats, I'm sorry, is a better name for it. That's what that was all about. Okay, here's another picture of Ronald Reagan. He's the president who made families rich. I can tell you, all the old men we're talking about, they loved him. They're like, oh, since he came into office, we got so rich. You know, the previous guy just screwed everything up, but he made everything better for everybody. Here's Dolly Parton, you know, the great country music singer. And she's actually a really nice lady, too. Okay, here is Hank Williams Jr. And man, his country music album, All My Rowdy Friends Have Settled Down, that's maybe the greatest country music album of any country music album ever. So here he is when he's a young guy. Here he looks more like his dad, and here he is with the big beard and everything else. Okay, but it's an awesome album. There's one great song I said, Mr. Weatherman, What Is Your Forecast? It's a great song. There's lots of great songs on that album. Country Boy Can't Survive is an all-time sort of anthem. I would call that the anthem of the Scots Irish, A Country Boy Can't Survive. Here's Chris Christophe, another Scots Irish guy. And this is what I mean by they're smart son of a bitches. Listen to this guy. Vietnam vet, Rhodes Scholar, country music songwriter and singer. He's an impressive guy. Then they got one after another guy like this. Okay, look at Mel Gibson, another Scots Irish guy. And, you know, this guy, he's not only one of the greatest actors of all time, he's really smart, really nice, honest, tries to do the right thing. He made some of the greatest all-time movies ever. His movie, Braveheart's one of the greatest movies ever made. He made other movies that were good, Mutiny on the Bounty. He was very good at, he's probably the best Hamlet. Laurence Olivier is good, but I think Mel Gibson's was better. His Hamlet was better. And he made lots of other movies that were great. The Patriot movie was a great movie, but Braveheart's the best one. Okay, here's a Scots Irish guy I think a lot of viewers of my channel will know, John McDougall, the greatest doctor who ever lived, another Scots Irish guy. Okay. Here's another great Scots Irish man, Jeff Nelson, a brilliant Yale, Stanford graduate who's done all kinds of wonderful things in the nutrition community, and he's an author of multiple books. Another guy trying to help the people and tell the truth. Not selling out, doing right by the people. Okay, a couple more words here from the book by Jim Webb. His grandmother told him, she said, "We are Scots Irish. We are born fighting." And that's the title of the book, Born Fighting. And I understand that after reading this book, it's one conflict after another. The English are in their face. English are in their face constantly. Okay, and then in the USA, they've been getting in their face too. Okay, so he says, so his grandmother told him, "We are Scots Irish. We are born fighting. We will never back down if the fight is right." Okay, that comes from his grandmother, okay? He says, "Andrew Jackson is the most underrated president. I am at heart a Jacksonian after Andrew Jackson." And again, like I told you, when I was young, I didn't really quite understand the Scots Irish. I knew that there were the English, you know, kind of hassled the Irish in Northern Ireland. I didn't quite get who the Scots Irish were or why they were there. They were sort of sent there to hold the territory by the English, but they were also treated like crap, not much better than the Irish. And I know, like I said, they were associated with Appalachia, the poor white people. They're often called white trash or something. We didn't know anything about them. We just heard that. Or we hear them called rednecks. The English New Englanders, you know, the Puritans and whatnot, their ilk sort of looked down on the Scots Irish, okay? But like I said, too, I started reading all these military histories and biographies, and I'm like, holy crap, these guys are a bunch of badasses, all right? I mentioned some of this stuff already when I was doing the introductory stuff. Country music is the only genre of music in the United States that I would say in general is pro-military. The Scots Irish are very patriotic. They're very supportive of the military. Tons of their guys go there. They have some of the highest casualty levels. I think they always have the highest casualty level because they're in all these conflicts for the USA. We talked about the tragedy of the Celts, loyalty to a tribal leader rather than to a national leader. So they weren't able to unify, and they then get overwhelmed by national armies. Let's see, the Romans can never conquer them. Oh, a lot of them are Calvinists. So a little bit of a Bible-thumping, self-righteous attitude. John Ruskin was influenced by that, the great art critic. The main book they read was the Bible. A lot of them were illiterate or didn't read much anything else than the Bible. He says, Jim Webb, the motto of the Scots was, "Only the strong survive." And then another reason, like, why did he write this book? So he's a Scots-Irish descent guy himself, and he sort of noticed that the Scots-Irish were such a big, important part of American culture and history, but they were relatively unknown to people, including myself, and I'm a relatively well-read guy. So he wrote the book so people could know the truth about what had happened. And I've read a bunch of histories of Ireland, but they usually don't go much into the history of the Scottish people. I just knew about them here and there from, how England had mistreated them. Okay, and I'd known some individual Scots people who I had very high opinion of, but, that's about it. Okay, so here's another stuff by Jim Webb. The Scots Irish are very stubborn and individualistic. They are willing to fight. Nonconformity is in the blood of the Scots Irish people. The dignity of the individual in the face of authority is a big deal to the Scots Irish people. And I think that's why the Democrats hate them so much. The Democrats hate the guts. I think they hate the Scots Irish more than any other ethnic group. And I think it's because they realize that's the only thing that could stop a communist takeover of the United States is people like the Scots Irish who said, no, we don't want USA to be communism. We want to be free. We want to keep our freedom of speech. We want to keep our freedom of assembly. We want to be allowed to live our lives. We want to own property. Thank you very much, okay? And so the Democrats don't like that. Democrats want slavery as fast as they can get it. So they don't like the Scots Irish, and now I understand why. Because they see the Scots Irish as somebody with the ability to oppose them versus everyone else they think is a bunch of weaklings and stupid and easy to control, can be corrupt, can be paid off, but not the Scots Irish. Okay. The theme song of the Scots is Scotland the Brave. Local Lamone, I talked about that. I Won't Back Down, Tom Petty or Johnny Cash version. I'll link to some of these songs in the description below. 1730 to 1760 is a big time when lots of Scots Irish went to the United States. So a lot of them were here and participated in, the 1776 conflict against the British. They prefer to be called Scots Irish because Scots is short for Scotland, the country. They don't like being called Scotch Irish because Scotch is, the whiskey, okay? The Scots Irish were a central part of the USA Marines during their era of greatness. So I think that's all I've got. It was rather extraordinary. It gave me a real sense of the people. So I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was real interesting.